Hey folks, welcome to this edition of the Brown Bag Lunch and Learn, brought to you by Arizona Trauma Institute. And I want to talk to you today, spend an hour talking to you about forward-facing professional resilience. Some of you have taken this course and you're participating in this as a refresher. Some of you have not had any exposure to this, and so I hope I'll do both of you justice and talk through, just kind of spend an hour talking about what is a 6-hour course and how this works in lessening work-related stress symptoms and enhancing professional quality of life and resilience. I'm happy to report that we've published 9 empirical peer-reviewed studies that have demonstrated that this particular workshop resolves compassion fatigue, work-related stress symptoms, and enhances performance, professional resilience, and professional quality of life. You'll notice that it's called, I've just recently changed the name of this whole process and calling it forward-facing professional resilience. I've just gotten that name registered with the U.S. Office of Patents and Trademarks, and have trademarked forward-facing. And what forward-facing is it's both an idea and it's a practice. The idea is that you don't have to do a bunch of kind of digging and upheaval stuff to have better quality of life. That it can begin straight away. And what it is the combination of self-regulation and intentionality, which I'll go into here in a little bit. That when we combine those two things into a process, what happens is that symptoms lessen and quality of life enhances. And I'll show you how those two things come together. First of all, you know, any of you who've ever taken a course from me know that a whole lot of what I do stands on the shoulders of and is cornerstoned by Viktor Frankl's work. And Viktor Frankl was a survivor of 3.5 years of internment in the Nazi death camps, and he wrote a beautiful book. For those of you who haven't read it, it's a testament of resilience, and it is called Man's Search for Meaning. And one of the quotes in that book is that that which is to give light must endure burning. And this has become kind of the sine qua non, the essence of our work with resilience, because it proffers both a warning and a prescription. The warning is that no matter how well insulated we are, no matter how attendant to our own resilience we are, that if you choose to be a giver of life, you are going to burn. You're going to experience pain from this work. That there's no way around it. And what happens until a person kind of can accept that, what they start thinking is because they're in pain from their work that something's wrong with them, that they shouldn't be in pain from this work. And you know, it's really nice to have Viktor just establish that you can't be a law enforcement officer. You can't be an emergency surgeon, emergency physician. You can't be a mental health provider or a hospice chaplain and witness that pain and violence and terror and it not impact you. Now, what we want to do is that we want to, you know, endure burning. We want to help folks to begin to develop the capacity to have pain without suffering. And those of you who've taken the course know that I spent some time talking about the difference in that. And, you know, to cut to the chase on it, the difference is that folks who are able to experience pain while being in a regulated autonomic nervous system, i.e. relaxed muscle body, what happens is that pain then is temporary and it doesn't diminish quality of life. That the person is not suffering from their pain, they're just experiencing pain. And you know, when I work a lot with folks that have chronic pain, and the first time that I say to them these words, they look at me like I sprouted a second head. I say, do you know that you can experience pain inside of a comfortable body? And that just doesn't even compute early on. But as folks get better at being able to interrupt their threat response while they're having a pain signal, their quality of life just significantly improves while they're living with chronic pain. Well, caregiving work is chronic pain. That's what Viktor's saying to us, is that we are living in chronic pain in our work, and we got to learn how to be able to be in pain without suffering from it. And how do you do that? Well, stay tuned, because that's what this is about. So the way the course is set up is the morning is dedicated to the problem, the afternoon is the solution. And we walk through the problem and we talk about compassion fatigue, and we define compassion fatigue, and then we redefine it. And that's what's fun about it, is we define it with kind of using what the field and the research has demonstrated, and then we define it for the 21st century. And the redefining of compassion fatigue, which I'll show you here in a little bit, is what becomes the window, or the kind of relief, vision of hope of how we can be in a toxic environment and not get sick from that toxicity. So what is compassion fatigue? Well, it's two things. It's the marrying of two things. It's burnout and secondary trauma. And that's what Charles Figley, my major professor, when he wrote the book in 1995, that's what he defined it. And now 23 years later, that definition has continued to hold, that is what compassion fatigue is. It's the combined effects of those two things. So what are those two things? Well, secondary trauma, there's a lot of conjecture, a lot of research about this, but to make it simple, and I like simple, here is secondary traumatic stress are the negative effects of our work that come from sitting across from people who are suffering or traumatized. It is hearing the stories of trauma. It is seeing people with gunshot wounds. It is intervening with domestic violence. It is being with somebody when they are at end of life. It is or their families. It's the human-to-human interaction of actually doing the care and bearing witness to all of that stuff. And what happens is that produces a set of symptoms that are just like PTSD. And matter of fact, in the DSM-5, for those of you who know what that is, that there's actually a mechanism to be able to diagnose that as PTSD, that it actually fits diagnostic criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of witnessing that from our work. So that's the post-traumatic stress part of it. But there's another part too that's equally heinous and disruptive, and that's burnout. And there's a whole lot of literature out there on burnout, but to, again, make it simple, burnout is the effects of the environment. It's all of those environmental things. It's the increased demands. It's the irritability of coworkers. It is the jerk boss. It's the low pay. It's the commute. It's the lack of resources, and all of those 1,000 paper cuts that we get through the day of things not working the way that they're supposed to. All of that environmental aspects, and the two of those combine to produce a set of symptoms that we call compassion fatigue. I want to just unpack these a little bit, and I always do this. I think this is a really nice lesson, a quick understanding of what secondary traumatic stress is. Look at your screen for the next 10 seconds. Now, notice what's happening in your body while you're looking at that picture. And most of you will find that there are tension in the muscles of your body. While you're looking at that picture, there's constriction that happens. And when I work with physicians, which I do a lot, I say, now add on top of that, that's one sensory channel. That's just seeing it. Now add to it the smells, add to it the sounds, add to it that you are responsible for making that crying stop. And what do you suppose is happening in your body while you're encountering that? And what I say to physicians is, you don't know, do you? Because you are, I am not very graceful. I just knocked everything off the table here. I took ballroom dancing when I was back when I was married, and I remember working with the instructor trying to figure out ballroom dancing, and the dancing instructor looked at me with just pity in her eyes, and she said, "Honey, you have 4 left hooves, don't you?" That's how graceful I am. But you see, just with this picture, most of you noticed that there was some arousal that occurred just from looking at the picture. And for many of us, we are encountering stuff like this either through direct sensory exposure or through story. We are constantly being confronted with trauma. And when you are constantly confronted with trauma, you develop traumatic stress. It's secondary, not primary, but it turns out that the symptoms are exactly the same. That you can't tell the difference between traumatic stress that is a result of being raped versus the rape counselors that work with rape survivors. That's what we discovered in early research, is that you couldn't tell the difference. If you didn't know what was causing it, their symptoms look exactly the same. It is post-traumatic stress that's just caused, instead of surviving a car accident, it is talking to people that have had motor vehicle accidents. And those are some of the symptoms that are associated with that. And I always like to say this. I think this is a good metaphor for those of you that have ever heard about frogs in pots. When you put a frog in a pot of hot water, what's the froggy do? He jumps out. Yeah. When you put a froggy in a pot of room temperature water, the froggy swims around. And when you turn the heat on under that pot, what happens is the frog its nervous system never gets enough stimulation to jump out of the pot. It keeps frantically looking for a way out of the pot and turns into frog soup. Indelicate metaphor, but I always like to say that we are the froggies, that we started our career at room temperature. But that heat's been on for a lot of us for years, and what's happening is it's such a gradual increase that rarely do we see the effects of secondary traumatic stress in our own lives. Usually it's our loved ones, it's our friends, it's our colleagues that suffer it and are aware of it long before that we are. And those of you who have taken the course, or if you decide to ever take this course, I advocate strongly that we identify one or two people in our lives that we can empower to become safety nets for us. That if they see us acting out, if they see us starting to exhibit behaviors that are obtuse or desperate or strange, that they confront us and that they save us from having to. Because, what happens with compassion fatigue is it doesn't spontaneously remit. It keeps getting worse. And what it usually turns into is the only way it gets better is that the person creates enough of a crisis that they are forced to deal with those effects. And sometimes those crises, that they ruin careers. And, you don't have to go all the way there to be able to start to reverse the direction of that. So becoming aware of it. So, how do you heal secondary traumatic stress? Well, it's pretty cool. I'm teaching a course right now over the next 3 days and teaching folks how to do that. And there are 3 things that heal trauma. And the 3 things that heal trauma are therapeutic relationship, relaxation, and telling the story. And so what I coach professionals to do is to develop a support network of people that they can step to, and they can share the narratives of their painful work experiences with a support network of people that they've trained how to listen to them instead of trying to fix them. That what has to happen is that stuff needs to get offloaded. And if you can share the narrative of the painful work experiences while staying in a relaxed body, and you share that narrative with somebody that listens to you and doesn't try to fix you, and they're regulating themselves, first of all, they don't get tertiarily traumatized. We actually did that research at Florida State. There's not tertiary traumatization. And B, what happens is that those painful work experiences become memory instead of something that's continuing to intrude here in the present, is that they get relegated to the past, and there's a resetting and there's a relief that comes with being able to share those pieces. And for folks that are in chronically high demand, first responder type situations, or where they're hearing a lot of trauma, then that needs to be a more frequent, maybe once a month, maybe even once every 2 weeks. For those that have less exposure, then once a quarter that you need to be sharing that material. But the best thing to do is to just not get it. And the way you don't get secondary traumatic stress is you cannot get traumatized while being in a relaxed body. If an assailant broke through that door while I was sitting up here talking to you and fired an automatic weapon all around this room, and I ran out of the room, but I stayed in a relaxed body, then what would happen is I could remember that assault that happened on September 5th, 2018, but it's not something that would intrude. It would be memory. That what produces trauma is the encoding of the experience with fear or terror. That's what gives it the energy that it keeps intruding into the present. So if we're able to stay in relaxed bodies while we're doing our work, we minimally encode that stuff as trauma so it doesn't impact us. So that's what I try to teach professionals to do, is to stay in a regulated autonomic nervous system, to intentionally relax the muscles of their body while they're doing the work, and they do not end up becoming traumatized as a result of that. So there's the secondary traumatic stress piece. Now the burnout. Everybody knows somebody who's burned out, all right? And think about, how do you know they're burned out? Well, they usually got a bad attitude, don't they? And if you think about here's what's really interesting to me, is you think about the trajectory of burnout, and there's really two stages of burnout. There's an activation stage where people are their legs are hopping and they're angry and they're irritable and they're yeah. And then there's an end stage of burnout where it becomes the conservation of energy, where it is flat and hopeless and depressed and learned helplessness, where they just become zombified. And here is Christine Maslach's definition of burnout, the Maslach burnout inventory. She developed that, and this is their definition of that. It's a psychological syndrome of emotional exhaustion, depersonalization. Depersonalization is like that becoming a robot, automatic, and reduced accomplishment. And in her meta-analytic research, what Christine Maslach at the University of California, Berkeley, said that the primary cause of burnout are workplace factors. And that's what every single person I've ever sat across from who is affected by their work believes. They believe that the cause of their symptoms is the workplace. And, I don't know why or how, but God or the universe or the great is or the great pumpkin, I'm not sure who's in charge of all that stuff, but somebody granted me, some force, some entity granted me with a gift of seeing this differently. And it's been a privilege to get to bring this to professionals. Because what happened was, as long as you believe that the workplace environment is causing your symptoms, then you live the rest of your professional life as a victim of that environment. I have an ACE score of 9. I know what it means to be a victim. And I'm never going back for nothing. And all of the work that I've been doing as a professional for the past 35 years has been about being able to transform victimhood. And so what I did in 1998 is I took my anger and I turned that into a new definition of burnout. And I've used this definition to help tens of thousands of people heal. And it is the chronic condition of perceived demands outweighing perceived resources. And that's interesting, because think about the people who are burned out. Do they perceive they have lots of resources or few resources? Well, do they perceive they have lots of demands or few demands? They perceive they have lots of demands upon them. They perceive they have very few resources. And when a person is in that state of dissonance, what do you suppose is going on in their body? Yes, it is a state of discomfort and activation. And it is that sustained state of being constricted and activated that is producing their symptoms. So what's really cool about that is there's two ways to heal burnout. Is that first, we teach professionals how to relax the muscles in their body. And how much distress are people who are in relaxed muscles suffering throughout their day if they're staying in a relaxed muscle body? How much distress are they having? Yeah, that's right. You guessed it. Zero, none. And the cool thing about being in a relaxed muscle body is what happens is your previously diminished functioning brain, whoop, comes back to maximum. It's like, taking a shot of Prevagen. Your brain comes back to working. You're fully functioning neocortically, and what we can start doing is we can start changing the way we perceive our workplace. And what I'm really clear about is that it is not your workplace that is causing your stress symptoms and your burnout. It is instead your perception of your workplace. And which of those are easier to change, the workplace or the perception of the workplace? What people who believe the workplace is causing it, what they're doing is they're trying to get the environment to change, and those environments will not shift just because I want them to. But when they start getting it, that it's not the environment, but it is my perception of that environment, then I can start to change perceptions. And I work with several. I have a process that I call perceptual maturation and help people to change. And one of the simple ones is to help folks to see that they have no demands upon them. Before somebody who's a professional meets me, they believe that their work demands this and this and this and this and this from them. And the first time that I tell them, adults don't have any demands. There is nothing demanded of you. That's the cool thing about being an adult. I get it that your boss is telling you have to do this, but you still have choice. You get to choose whether you do it or not. Now, I'm not saying to choose not to do it, but I am saying that if you're going to do a task, whether you like it or not, you do it because you choose to do it, not because it's conscripted of you. And when you start doing tasks because you choose to do it, you stop being a victim. And that changes the environment. You change the way you look at things, and the things you look at change. That environment shifts and becomes less coercive, less damaging to you as you change your perceptions of it. So that's how we work with the burnout component of that. So kind of pulling this all together, we've developed this concept of traumagenesis. And here's the story of traumagenesis told through three pictures. We've got a person who's a dog lover who gets attacked by a dog, and then they become transgendered. No, that's a bad joke. Hope I didn't offend anybody with that. Not really. They don't become transgendered, but they do generalize that now all dogs are dangerous, that they now, as a result of having that one painful single trial learning experience, what happens is that now takes out into the world, that aperture opens up, and any sensory experience that is in any way similar to that painful learning experience turns into the perception of threat. And there are three ways that a person can experience that. PTS, post-traumatic stress, they can survive it. STS, secondary traumatic stress, they can witness it either through in vivo of seeing it happen or through story. Or even more insidious, and this is really what burnout is all you got to do to get traumatized is be around other people who are traumatized and not regulate your autonomic nervous system, because we're herd animals. And anytime you're around somebody who is perceiving threat, what happens is your body involuntarily responds to that person who is jacked up. We become jacked up too, unless we intentionally intervene with our own autonomic nervous system and dial down our arousal. So those are the three ways that all three of those things are happening all day long as we navigate through our workplace. And what's happening is we get, if you're not regulating that process, what happens is you get done with the day feeling like you've been, walked over by a herd of sneetches or orcs or whatever those things are. Mm-hmm. So that is the definition of compassion fatigue. And here's what we do in the course to redefine it. I ask folks Is your job stressful? And everybody goes, duh, what do you think I'm sitting here in this course for? Of course it is. And so I asked them to come up with what are some of the causes and what are some of the effects. And here's some of the kind of common ones they come up with is paperwork, scheduling, demand, administration, threat management, risk management, patient safety, all of that stuff there. And then what are the effects of stress in your life? Well, here's some of those. And then what I say to them is once I collect that data, I say, these are not the cause of your stress. And as long as you believe that these are the cause, you will continue to have these effects. Matter of fact, the reason why you have these effects is because you mistakenly believe these to be the cause. And I go through a process that I call Tools for Hope, teaching them about their autonomic nervous system, which leads them to this understanding. I tell every single person that ever takes this course, this. Your job is not stressful. I do a lot of keynoting with nurses at nursing conventions, and it's the first thing I say to a room full of nurses. I say, there's not a one of you in this room that have a stressful job. And the nurses go, they growl at me. And then I unpack this stuff. There's the look that I get. But I help them to start to understand that what the true cause of stress is the perception of threat. And the reason why they are perceiving threat where there is no danger is because they have had painful past learning that is somehow sensorially similar. It has similar sensory experiences, smells, sounds, images, to a painful learning experience is happening here in the present. And what's happening is that sensory memory is coming forward here into the present, causing that person to now perceive threat here in the present, where there is little or no danger. And what happens is the body responds exactly the way an animal's body is supposed to respond when it's threatening, is it juices the energy level up. And what's happening is that as we go through work, we've had so much painful learning around those sensory experiences that we are constantly, throughout a workday, encountering perceived threat after perceived threat after perceived threat after perceived threat. And we are not regulating our way through that process. And as a result of that, we suffer symptoms that are terribly distressing. But do you see, until you know that it is not the environment that is causing it, so said a little bit differently, it is not these things that are causing stress, but think about if I attached a different colored thread to each one of these boxes and I stretched that thread out to the left here, and I sat with you and I said, okay, now tell me about demands in your life. Let's look back over your life. Do you have any painful learning in your history about demands? Or how about patient satisfaction if you're a nurse or a doctor? You have any painful learning about patient satisfaction or reimbursement or working with mean patients or paperwork? And what every one of us have are discrete experiences back there in our history of painful learning associated with each one of these boxes, so that when we step into those situations here in the present, it's just like a combat veteran that here's on the 4th of July. It's the same process that's happening. It's not the fireworks that are causing the combat veteran to have exaggerated startle. The fireworks sensory experience in the present is activating the combat memories, which are coming forward, hijacking the perceptual system of the present, causing that combat veteran here today on July 4th to perceive threat where there is little or no danger, producing an intense electrochemical response inside of their body. So it's not their environment, it is the past learning intruding into the perceptual system of the present that is causing their distress. And once a person gets that, man, it's all downhill from there. There's a whole new vista that's opened up. And so, everybody has this moment with me where you're saying, hold on a minute. You're telling me that the only problem I got is that my body's just responding like a bear when somebody's poking it. But nobody's really poking me. Like it is my painful past learning, and you're telling me that all I got to do to not have stress anymore from my work is to relax the muscles of my body. Is that what you're saying? I'm saying, yep, that's it. It is that simple. And they're incredulous. And I'll say, okay, I don't want you to believe me, but what I'm going to ask you to not do is to not have contempt prior to investigation. Why don't you go try it? Because I can show you the data that says when people do this, things get better for them. Would you be willing to try it and see what happens? Yeah, fine. And what happens is they try it and their lives transform. And that's pretty cool. So to underscore this, I always ask this question. Who is it that is squeezing the muscles in your body? It's not your spouse, it's not your boss, it's not your patients, it's not your bank account. You are the one who is squeezing the muscles in your body. Are you enjoying that squeezing? Because if you are, keep squeezing. But if you're not, then I'd like to invite you to stop. Which moves us, for the second half of this, into the solution. That's lunchtime. That's kind of what we get done in the workshop before lunchtime. And here is the entrance way into the solution. And this is a definition that I discovered of disease way back in 2001. When I was in New York working with the recovery efforts there after September 11th, I stumbled on a website, and I'm absolutely certain it was the CDC, but I've not been able to find it since then, so I can't say for definite it was the CDC. But I stumbled on this definition that disease is not the presence of a toxic environment. It is instead the absence of an effective immune system. The flu virus doesn't cause the flu. What causes the flu is your immune system's inability to stop the viral replication of the flu virus. Bing! Snap! That's different. That the CDC doesn't, when there's an epidemic, they don't fumigate the air. They enhance individuals' immune system. And that's what this course is about. It's about enhancing your immune system so that you can live and work in a toxic environment and not get sick from that toxicity. Where previously, with a diminished immune system, you do get sick. But as you increase that immune system, now you're able to work in a toxic environment and it not kill you. And here is a good articulation of what that is. Stimulus, response, space in the middle. When we can hold that space, we can become intentional in our response. And when we can become intentional in our response, A, we're not suffering, and B, we can be who and how we want to be. But the problem is that people who are dysregulated, space collapses. They don't have space. And mostly what I watch with professionals is their space is collapsing all day long as they're working. So I just finished a book with my friend Jim Dietz. Jim is 38-year emergency physician who was the chief of emergency medicine at Marin General Hospital in San Francisco, across the bridge in San Francisco, Marin County. And he and I have been working together with physician resilience for the past 9 years, and we just finished a book on this. And I want you to hear Jim talk about this experience for him. It's a little 4-minute clip. It's pretty cool.
There's an expectation placed on us as emergency medicine professionals, and an expectation that we place on ourselves that no matter what they throw at us, no matter what happens during a shift, we're going to handle it. We are going to suck it up and handle it. And what's really happening is that the more that gets thrown at us, the more distressed we're becoming. And we perceive that, oh, the rack is still full. There's that obnoxious patient over there. There's that jerk surgeon I got to talk to. The administrator said we got to get that patient upstairs within an hour, and it's already an hour and 20 minutes. And there are all these external pressures that are heaped on top of just, Mrs. Jones, how are you today? How can I help you today? What is it we can do for you today? I mean, I'm trying to talk to Mrs. Jones, and I'm aware of all these things that I'm supposed to be dealing with, and I'm aware of the full rack that's right over my right shoulder of patients that need to be seen. So I guess traditionally, or from the way I used to look at it, was I would just see all those external pressures as being insurmountable, piling up, creating more responsibility, feeling more stress. Demands of this patient are so great. How will I ever meet them? Demands of this environment are so great. How can I ever meet those demands? They're asking me to do so much. That's this overwhelmed feeling. Well, what has changed is that I realize that in fact, there's not one of those things that's going to hurt me in the moment. They're really not going to hurt me. There's no real specific threat to my well-being in the midst of this crisis. That Mr. Jones' demands or Mr. Jones' suffering is not my suffering. Patients in the waiting room, they're waiting. I understand that. But I'm not suffering because they're waiting. Well, I shouldn't be. I don't need to suffer because they're waiting. And I don't need to suffer because an administrator may have expectations that I can't fulfill in the moment. Those will all sort themselves out. What I can control is my response to it all. And by doing so, not only do I end up feeling less stressed, less anxious, less intimidated, more connected, more impassioned with my work, not only do I feel that those ways, but I also sense that I'm not being damaged. I feel like I'm going to be here tomorrow and the next day and the next day and be able to do it better.
There is no specific threat to my well-being in the midst of this crisis. I mean, that's just a beautiful articulation of this whole program. There is nothing in this moment that is a real danger to me. I do not need my threat response. It is superfluous and it's over adaptation. So what we've done is we've built this vaccine. You know, here is the immune enhancer. This is the formula for how a professional caregiver gets to be in a toxic environment and not get sick from it. And there are 5 skills that require that we work for the rest of our lives. Self-regulation and intentionality. Those are the 2 primary skills. Those are the ones that turn into the forward-facing process, is the pairing of self-regulation and intentionality. And then, as I talked about previous, is the perceptual maturation of evolving these, the way that we perceive our world and the workplace instead of trying to change the workplace. And then using peer support, connection and support is a very powerful and ameliorating component that the more symptomatic that we get with work-related stress, the less we are able to use our peer support. And then finally, self-care and revitalization, which up until this course, mostly everything that I've ever heard about trying to manage compassion fatigue and work-related stress has been around self-care. Self-care is important, but it's only one little piece. There's all of this other stuff that has to go with it before you can have quality of life. You cannot resolve compassion fatigue simply with self-care. It's not enough. It's important, but it's not enough. So the first skill is learning how to confront perceived threats while monitoring, A, and then B, acutely relaxing the muscles in my body in real time. It's not taking a break and going out over here in the corner and going Om and meditating. It is the ability, while I'm sitting here in front of this camera, thinking about all of you that's sitting at home watching this going, and perceiving your judgment of me as a threat while I am in real time monitoring my physiology and continuing to interrupt the threat response that I'm having sitting here in front of this camera by taking my attention briefly off of the camera, scanning my body, noticing the muscles that are constricted, releasing that constriction, and then returning my attention to the camera and to the material that I'm doing. And the ability to work that dialectic of body, intervene, activity, world, and being able to do those two things in real time. What's happening is I consistently now am interrupting my threat response, so I never reach the place where I become desperate and so uncomfortable that I need to get out of that situation. I am continuing able to restore myself to comfort as I move through the day. And you know, as I said, it is helping folks to see that this is as simple as becoming aware that the muscles in your body are being squeezed and then simply unsqueezing them in real time. I mean, it really is that simple. It's just a whole different kettle of fish of trying. Nobody's ever tried to really do that while engaged in the activities of daily living. Nobody's ever taught us to do that. Nobody's ever coached us to do that. And that's what this course does, is it teaches and then it coaches folks how to begin to develop this into mastery. And here is some folks from Barnes Jewish Hospital that I worked on this, just articulating some of these resilience skills.
When you get to that physiology part, especially the nurses in the group, all of a sudden you've got them. They're like, wait a minute, this is starting to make sense.
One is that I've gotten a lot more aware about how both stress and feeling overwhelmed, which I guess is stress, the really intricate connection with what's happening in my body.
That's the biggest thing. Beyond that, it's really it's practicing relaxation. It's practicing regulating my autonomic nervous system, both sympathetic and parasympathetic. It's with practice, it becomes very easy, almost second nature, and I can often get those two systems to sort of harmonize and sort of play off each other, and it creates an energy that I can ride. Those are the things that I find most helpful.
In coming to a better
So that's self-regulation. The second and other crucial skill for professional resilience is intentionality. And the way that I discovered this is, early on, the very first thing we did with compassion fatigue is we built a treatment. It was a 5-session treatment model called the Accelerated Recovery Program. And the way that this resilience course got built was I sat across from hundreds of professionals at first at the Murrah building bombing from Oklahoma City, and then with folks at New York and professional caregivers from around the world, actually, South Africa, Truth and Reconciliation Commission, worked with a whole lot of folks that had compassion fatigue really badly and helped and treated them. And what I started discovering, I didn't go into it looking for this, but what I discovered was as folks were increasingly dysregulated and suffering the effects of compassion fatigue, what they saw, the way that they conceptualized that, was the work was hurting them. And what they were doing was becoming increasingly aggressive or avoidant of their work, in their work, and of their work. And what I started discovering is in their attempts to get the world into the shape that they could tolerate it, they were in habitual violation of their own integrity. And that was a light bulb over my head. It was a moment of just piercing kind of, damn, that's big. Was to start to get it that, and here's what I kind of came to, is that if you are in habitual and willful violation of your integrity, shouldn't you be uncomfortable? Isn't that a good thing, that you can't live in habitual and willful violation of your integrity and be comfortable doing that? That's interesting. And it just kept being head scratching stuff. And so, it took me a little while, but one of the things that I started doing was catalyzing this whole process of showing folks that they were acting aggressively or avoidantly in those situations at work that were a violation of their integrity. And what happened is, as that progressed over months and years, is they started getting hopeless. And one of the other things that happens was they lost their mission. Like that they couldn't hold on to mission anymore. It was just about surviving work. So they began to conserve energy and no longer had any cathexis to their mission. They forgot about their mission just to be able to survive work. And so one of the things that we did early on was to start to connect, was to reinvigorate mission and help folks to articulate who and how do you want to be when you're at work. And show them that every single time that they violated that was when they got jacked up and they had so much energy in their body that they were compelled to act aggressively or avoidantly. And as I helped them to walk into work while staying in a relaxed muscle body, what happened was that space that previously had collapsed began to open back up again. So they could start to be who and how they wanted to be in those situations, and they could stay connected to their mission through those situations. And what started happening is, I'm just seeing a parade of faces in my mind right now, of tear-filled eyes of people giving me hugs and handshakes, who were able to rekindle both their mission and their sense of honor. It's been pretty sweet to give that back to folks, to show them how they can live with honor and not have to live with violation of their integrity. Because until they learn about the reason that they're violating their integrity is because they're jacked up, the way that they try to live with integrity is they brute force and muscle, and that's not sustainable. They act out aggressively or avoidantly. The space collapses. The only way that you can sustain intentional living is that you got to walk into those high demand situations and you got to take the charge out. You got to relax the muscles of your body. And what happens is when you relax the muscles of your body and walk into situations where previously you've been aggressive or avoidant, what happened is you walk through that situation, get done with it, look back and go, that's exactly the man I want to be, or the woman I want to be. And there starts to be this repair of morality, this repair, restitution of intention and purpose. And, Eric Greitens has gotten a whole lot of trouble with his morality, but he wrote a beautiful book. Some of you are familiar with him. He was the governor of Missouri that was disgraced. He wrote a beautiful book about resilience, and he said, here's the quote around that, which I just love. He says, the reason why you are suffering is because you don't know what you're doing here. And as you help people to live back close to their mission, it gives them the long suffering. It gives them the ability and the resilience to walk through hardship, and that hardship not diminish them, because they are in service to something greater than them. And that is the sine qua non of resilience. And those two things, self-regulation and helping people to live intentionally instead of reactively, is what has kind of come together to make this whole forward-facing process into something that I do with trauma, that I do with resilience, that I do with parenting, that I do with performance on the golf course. Everything that I do with folks is helping them to pair these two things of intention with self-regulation, and what that does is it A, heals the trauma of the past, and B, creates quality of life right here in the present immediately. So here's my friend Joel talking about intentionality.
My job is my opportunity to practice my promise to myself, and as a caregiver, my promise is to go forward and do what I can to make a difference and take care of each patient, colleague, visitor that I come into contact with. then that's what I'm there to do, one day at a time.
Well, as you go through the day long, we do it as a day long session for the most part, and just watching folks from 8 o'clock in the morning until 2 or 3 in the afternoon, just various points in the program, things beginning to click. Moments of frustration and confusion to moments of clarity to moments of frustration and confusion to clarity, and just watching that series of events repeat itself. And by the end of the day, folks are certainly tired, but they walk out of there feeling like they have hope that they can save themselves from what they have been viewing as a real threat to something that's important to them, their work, that they're very passionate about.
What other job can you think of where you can say, you go home in the day and say, I did something that I've touched somebody today in a positive way, and I've helped them. I said, so remember that. If you choose to do this and you really want to do it, you're going to get a lot of rewards. I'm not going to say it's all going to be good, and that people may not be mean to you, but in the end, it's worth it.
Reconnecting with your sense of mission.
So the third, those were the two primary ones, self-regulation and intentionality. The third resilience skill is perceptual maturation, and I've already talked about some of those. And we've kind of split this into two areas. There's like the beginning process, which is the detoxifying of the workplace, and then there is the kind of advanced process of optimizing in your environments, and doing both of those two things as a lifelong process of enhancing resilience. Some of the perceptual shifts that that have become kind of common among a lot of caregivers that we work on helping them to shift their perception of is these are some of the things. If you are interested in coming to the workshop, I explore those and we talk about those. But I want you to hear my friend Lisa talk about perceptual maturation. When I first went to Barnes-Jewish Hospital to start to train facilitators, she was part of those. She's a chaplain at the hospital there, and she was in a frumpy dress, and she was probably somewhere around 350 pounds. And it was, and I did the one-day workshop, and she was going to be in the group of people that were facilitating. And then I came back 3 or 4 months later to start to do the training for the facilitators. And she comes up to me and says, "Hi, Eric, how you doing?" She starts having a conversation with me, telling me about how she's been doing all this. And I said, do I know you? And she said, "I'm Lisa. I was in your group. You knew." I was like, she had dropped like 120 pounds, completely changed her whole, like it was a whole different person as a result of her implementing it. I didn't even recognize her as how much she changed. It was pretty interesting, pretty neat.
You're feeling angry about a situation with a patient or a family, and you can't fix it, and the helpless feeling you have, no matter how much training you have and all of the credentials you have, some things elude us totally. And how to be okay with that, knowing that we've done the best that we can. And that's taken a long time for me to figure that out.
It's that sort of thing. I'm not perfect, but I'm as good as I can be, and that's all of me. That's the best I can deliver. So, and being happy and satisfied with that.
You do have a choice. I have made some better choices that help me to do what I'm doing, in a sense of the way I live, and what I'm not going to actually, let enter my world as much, in the sense of when I go home, and to learn how to just say, okay, before I leave here, I got to just say, I have done what I could do, and then it's good enough. Telling myself, it's good enough, and even if it isn't good enough, it's good enough because it's good enough today.
And even if it isn't good enough, it's good enough because it's good enough today. There it is. There is perceptual maturation. So to finish this up, last 5 minutes, the fourth skill is connection and support. You know, the more we learn about Stephen Porges' work with the polyvagal theory, the more that we're learning about this stuff, the more it is just crucial that if you don't want to suffer from the effects of your painful learning in your past, you gotta have connection and support with other human beings. That human beings are wired to manage the threat response relationally. And what happens is the more symptomatic that we get, the more insular and isolatory that we become. We are less able to activate and utilize support networks. And it's just crucial to become resilient as a professional caregiver that we use these skills. And then finally, the last resilience skill is self-care. But self-care is rarely what you think it is. And that's what we've learned. Like, most people think of self-care as indulgence, bubble baths and chocolate. But mostly what self-care is doing the stuff you don't want to do on the front end, that when you do it on the back end, you are more buoyant and have more strength and more stamina. It's stuff like aerobic activity. It's stuff like preventative health care and eating right and going to bed early. And, you know, all of those things that we don't really associate with caring for ourselves. And you know, as I said earlier, with Viktor Frankl's quote, he said, you know, that which is, I hope I've got that in here. No, I don't. That which is to give light must endure burning. That was a warning, but it's also a prescription. And, you know, we bring the prescription up at the end of the workshop, which to say the prescription of that, if something's going to burn, it needs fuel. And what our job is as stewards of our own machine, of our own system, is we need to refuel our system. And if we refuel regularly our system, spiritually, emotionally, physically, intellectually, professionally, as we're able to refuel on all those levels, what that means is I can come to work and I burn fuel. If I don't refuel, I come to work and I burn Eric. And Eric doesn't burn very long or very brightly before he burns out. So that is, to kind of bring this the 5 things which have evidence-based, demonstrated in 9 published studies, is that if you put your walking shoes on a couple times a week and do healthy things for yourself a couple of times during the week, A. B, connect with somebody, share what's going on with you. Get vulnerable, get real with another human being once or so a month. Evolve your perceptions of, you know, there are no demands upon me. I'm not really in danger. I can choose what I do and don't do, and I'm going to choose to do this. Live in accordance with your principles and your code, and stop squeezing the muscles in your body. Now, that's not a high tax. But when you engage these processes on a regular basis, you get to work in this field that is toxic and not get sick from it. So again, between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies both our growth and our freedom. If anything in this workshop intrigued you, if you are interested in participating in this 1-hour thing, if you're interested in participating in this workshop, I'll be doing it here at Arizona Trauma and live simulcast. I think that is on it's on the 6th of October, I think. It's on our website, aztrauma.org. Look under courses and you'll discover that. I invite you to participate in that workshop if you're interested. It's been a privilege to be with you here this afternoon, and I hope to see all of you again sometime in the future. Thank you very much.